So I'm so excited to welcome to the stage Clark Young, one of the co-creators of the Thanks so much, Clark, for being here. So I don't think it will come as a surprise to anyone that this film is based on a play. But I was surprised to learn that the original play was not a one-man show, but an ensemble piece that featured students. And so I'd love to hear about that process and how did it come to be a one-man show?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. It's great to be here, and thank you for being such a tremendous audience. And I know that very shortly we're going to see Jan Karski himself pop up here at the end of the credits, photographed by Carole Harrison. So I'll pause for a moment when that happens. But I was a student at Georgetown, and Derek Goldman, who's the director and co-creator with myself and David of the theater piece, he was my professor. I was, sorry? Oh, distracting? Okay. Oh, sure. Derek was asked to create a short piece about Jan Karski to commemorate his centennial. Karski, of course, was a professor at Georgetown and had passed away in 2000. Karski, so this was in 2014, April. Derek asked me to help him out, and he asked David to help him out as well. And we started working on it with a small ensemble of students. It began as a piece that was inspired by my own experience because I'd gone to Georgetown for 4 years and walked by Karski's statue, which sits on, and there he is. We just went to Poland with the play. Just came back, so it's kind of an emotional experience just to even see him again back in New York. But it was based on my experience walking by Karski's statue, not bothering to stop, not bothering to notice. I was one of those people that just kept walking by in my own complacency, and so I really wanted to interrogate that. So the piece began with an ensemble of students walking by the statue, stopping and asking a question of Professor Karski and that story coming to life. We then went to Poland in 2014 for the first time, the three of us, and worked with students from the academy in Krakow, and we began to sort of think about the possibility of a really physical piece, because these actors brought a remarkable Polish physicality to the piece, just as it's imbued with Polonarińska.
So when you went to Poland with it, you actually then worked with local students and reinvented and redeveloped the piece?
Absolutely, and that's when Szmul Ziegelboim actually also emerged, because I began to look at the history of Poland and understand a little more deeply what Karski's connection was to this person. And so around then, we started to wonder what it would look like if David, as an older actor, started to embody the younger Karski's experience. But we still continued with an ensemble piece. We then had a residency at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park, and I don't know if any of you saw that piece. Wow, amazing. We've got some OGs here. This is amazing. That was with an ensemble of professional actors, and I think I'd always felt, through no fault of their own, that there was something that was lacking. There was an affect of not knowing that was being performed, as opposed to an actual direct connection between Karski, the professor, and an audience who could engage in this history and learn it or experience it differently and for the first time. So we eliminated the ensemble and created a new scene partner. And that was sort of the genesis of it in 2019. So this is 5 years later after we began to work on it. And we've been living with this and written a number of iterations and passed it around, the three of us. David deserves a writing credit as much as I do, and Derek, he wouldn't say that. And we then went to London in January of 2020 and did it as a one-person show. We had some things lined up, and that's when we met Eva Inesco, who's the producer of this film, and she saw it in London. And she said, would you ever think about filming it? And we said, no, we're going to do this play for a while. And then we brought COVID back. We were patient zero, and the rest. And then we reached back out to Eva and filmed it in a studio in Williamsburg. So it was kind of a remarkable convergence and very irregular for how a film and a play exist, because the play then lived again, and I don't know if anyone saw it at Theater for a New Audience, but it's run in DC, in Chicago, in New York, and then most recently in Berkeley, California, and then most recently in Poland.
While you were creating the piece, that a lot of the the text and of the script is based on Karski's original writings.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how you did that research, how you pulled that in, how did you cull through all of that, and what was that process in the room?
Really challenging, and I think that all of the words are Karski's. The resources included oral histories from the USC Shoah Foundation, which you can find on YouTube, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Karski's book, Story of a Secret State, E. Thomas Wood's book, Karski, How One Man Tried to Stop the Holocaust. All of these occur during different points of Karski's life, so you get to experience the different ways that he told the story and the same ways he told the story. And we tried to sort of whittle it down to its most essential, its leanest, really, so that both things could happen. One, you could understand this singular history as it happened, and two, it could potentially and hopefully pop with some kind of contemporary resonance because, of course, this history, I think we have always felt, and whenever we've done it, has echoes of what's happening in the contemporary moment, and never as much as it has recently. So.
One of your points brought me to what I was hoping would be a later question, but it feels relevant now as we're thinking about the writings. Something that is a line in it is I was like a cameraman. I wasn't supposed to have feelings. And so when you were looking at his writings, where did you see the moments where he did shed his feelings, and was there times in his writings where he was more clinical in the ways that he wrote and shared about his experiences?
I'm going to take a second to think about that. That's a really, really good question, and I've never been asked it before. Part of what makes Karski so remarkable is that you always feel that tension between a person who is very good at doing a job and someone who can't help but feel, especially for in a job that requires him not to. One of the reasons we end the piece with what Karski says at the end of Story of a Secret State is I feel like it encapsulates that. He feels both the satisfied weariness of someone who's done his job, as in a 26-year-old who's met with the President of the United States, a young Pole who escaped death many times and himself, and witnessed horrors beyond the imagination, and yet he also feels this nausea as he sits down on a bench, and he actually where he goes is to the statue of Kosciuszko in Lafayette Square, where he, another Polish hero, and reads the inscription, and freedom shrieked as Kosciuszko fell. And so that to me encapsulates a moment where he is showing us both. I think he's always two sides of the same coin, no matter what moment exists. I think the most clinical he probably is his first mission, when he's really, and there was an interesting performance question too that the three of us debated, which is when he goes to Łódź, Lublin, and Belzhic in his first mission, which in some sense is just as important as his second, because he's warning the Polish government about what he's seeing early in the war. He's trying, you see him trying his best, and I think David does a really brilliant job of doing that, and it's not until that second trip to the transit camp in Izbiko where he truly says, it came too deeply into me, humans, there are individuals here. And even then, there's an interesting moment where he's wondering what he's capable of. One is to go with the Jews to the train, as he says, and another is to fight the Gestapo. And so you're thinking about all these different emotions that he had. I mean, it's remarkable. So I think the most clinical use of language that he brings is probably that first mission.
Amazing. Do you see Karski as a hero, or do you see him also as a victim of the war?
I think that one of the most profound aspects of Karski, and what I find so instructive, is that he eschews the label of hero, right? That Landsman says, you're a hero, and he says, no, I'm an insignificant little man, and that becomes a mantra of his that he recites for many years to come. Karski's someone who endures. He lives through suicides of his partner, of someone that he feels he brought, in a sense, left to die, in Shmuel Ziegelboim. He, in my mind, encapsulates nation-states failures that weren't his to hold. So in that sense, he is heroic, but I think I would call him neither a hero or a victim. I think he's just an individual who is experiencing and bearing witness and doing the utmost that he can at any given moment.
Will you tell us more about now the process of translating this play into the film that we just saw?
Yeah, so Eva Anesco said, let's do this, and then when the first COVID wave ended, we shot in a studio in Williamsburg, and over 6 or 7 days, the film crew's maybe first job since the pandemic had begun, and we, Eva quickly brought on Jeff Hutchins, who was the director of photography and the co-director of the film with Derek, and he immediately brought a vision, one of which was to shoot in black and white. The second was, and one of the cool things about the black and white aspect of it was that this Williamsburg studio was all white. It was sort of circular, and we shot all of the white sequences, the beginning and the end, first, and then overnight the set was painted black, and we shot the middle pieces, and light gave some of the grayness to some of that gray world as well, so there were sort of 3 distinct color palettes. He shot on a 30-foot techno crane, 50-millimeter lens to mimic the field of human vision, so that the camera felt like it was bearing witness in the way that Karski was, and the eye of the camera comes back in that sense. And yeah, it was a pretty remarkable experience, because the other thing that Jeff really wanted to do was shoot in long takes to evoke the endurance of David's performance. And some of these takes are 15 minutes long, and boy, you're sitting there like at the end of the dugout when a pitcher's pitching a perfect game, and you don't want to look at him, it's like the 9th inning or whatever, and you're just kind of looking down, and and then he says the wrong line, you're like, God damn it, let's go back. But no, David was, in a sense, spiritually, not to conflate what one person did with another, but it felt to me like he was Karski's messenger in that way, because we were watching him repeat and repeat and repeat and try to transmit a message. And in many ways, our choice to have him be himself, or a version of himself at the beginning, is to also evoke Karski's choice to speak on behalf of a people who were not him, or did not share his beliefs, who were other, who weren't able to speak for themselves. And so that aspect of the filming was really remarkable.
Cool. And so you said just recently you just returned from Poland, and I'd love to hear more about the tour that you went on. How did having created this then affect going back to the stage after?
Yeah, we added some stuff. We added a sequence with Karski and his sister when he comes back to Warsaw before he joins the underground. Briefly, he finds his sister Laura. A couple writing tweaks. To be totally transparent, it's very strange to sort of do a play twice, and then I'm sure I speak for David and Derek too, that then to do it in front of a camera and know that people will see it is intense. And I think that it taught us a lot about what the play was, and then we returned to it and thought, okay, there's some little stitching that we want to do to get it right. Not to say that this doesn't get it right, but that, they're living, breathing, it's a living, breathing thing that we're constantly working on, or have been for some time. And so I think that was the big thing, was the experience of doing it almost like ritualistically in that studio for 6 days, had us thinking a lot about how we would want to do it should we get the chance to do it in a theatrical space again. And quickly we did. And so that was one of the big ones. Yeah.
And will you tell us a little bit about the tour? I got a sneak peek before, and it's really
yeah. We, with the Jan Karski Educational Foundation, who's been a longtime partner with us, and with the Polish Press Agency, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and anyone who knows about the Polish government knows that much like the United States, there is a rise of nationalism, and the Jan Karski Educational Foundation itself has been blacklisted by some regional educational heads. So we felt a little bit surprised to be invited in that way by a co-production that included the Ministry of Foreign Affairs coming to see the the play, and we ran in Warsaw, in Krakow, in Poznan, and then in Karski's home of Łódź. We visited all the Karski statues at each of these towns and talked with a lot of different, a lot of people who had been living with this history, who had stories that they just, it's a very raw, unimaginable place because like it's newly democratic in the sort of scale of history, and so there's a lot that's still being reckoned with and understood, and so notions of Polish complicity in the Holocaust are very contested and fragile to discuss. And I think, I'll just end with this. People in Poland were very excited to see David, and after one production in Łódź, I was backstage, and a guy snuck through the ropes and came in the back, and he was like right at David's dressing room, and I was like, "Excuse me, sir, you gotta go back here. Why don't you walk with me?" He said, "No, you don't understand. My grandfather was the guy who caught him out of the window." And I said, "Well, you take after him clearly because you snuck right in here." And I said, "Okay, you can chill with David for a little bit." But that was the kind of thing, I think that Marian Tursky came to see the play in Warsaw, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but he gave an amazing speech at the UN, and a Holocaust survivor who I believe went to Auschwitz with Vice President Harris's husband and Deborah Lipstadt, and he talked about Karski talking about Ziegelboim. And he used a phrase that I'd never heard before, which was that Karski had told him that he felt like he'd killed Ziegelboim. And that, that was pretty, so it was stuff like that that was very heavy, but also very uplifting, because people wanted to be there and talk about it. And that was not necessarily my experience in 2014. One of the reasons the I Am No James Bond line is in there, which Karski actually said, was in reference to sort of some of the earlier versions of the play where people were like, "Hi, can you lean into the James Bond stuff a little more?" And I was like, oh my God, this guy who says I'm not a hero, I'm an insignificant little man, it would not do it justice to tell it like a Chris Hemsworth movie, So there's a little bit of friction there, and I think that was not the case when we returned to Poland, and that it's interesting given the new government that took over there.
Sure. So in a moment, we're going to turn to the audience for questions. So start thinking, and Juliet will come by with a microphone. But I just want to ask one more question. So before the screening, I asked the audience how, sort of something for them to think about. I asked, how does our responsibility change once we learn the truth? What present-day issues are in the world that are relevant and relate to this and help us rethink what it means to, relate to humanity? So my question for you is what lessons do you hope the audience takes away?
I've been really lucky because during the pandemic, another thing that happened was that there was an initiative at Georgetown called Just Communities that was created to create one-credit pass-fail courses for students to engage with what they were bearing witness to right now in different ways. And that was in part a sort of twinned initiative that was connected to both the pandemic and George Floyd's murder. We were asked to create a course about that along with my colleague Ijoma Njaka, who teaches at Georgetown. She's an inclusive pedagogy specialist, and we created a class called Bearing Witness: The Legacy of Young Karski Today that she has continued to teach there. And I think that the privilege of that experience is that we've gotten to listen to how students are reckoning with this history. And a question I get a lot is like, how is there any hope in this story? Where's the hope? And for me personally, I've noticed that students really find Karski's presence as hopeful because he baseline acknowledges what's happening, what everyone is seeing with their own two eyes and hearing with their own two ears and feeling in their heart. And and so often they find themselves stuck between people saying, no, you gotta listen to both sides, or there's this and there's that, and there's no such thing as truth. And here's a person who is acknowledging it and already jumping over that hurdle that they're so hungry to jump over. And then they use Karski to apply, they apply his legacy to things like racial allyship, one person speaking on behalf of another across difference. Denial in all its forms, disinformation, namely across social media, but of course also in mass media. Jonathan Safran Foer wrote an amazing book called We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast, where he uses Karski's meeting with Frankfurter to interrogate our denial around the planet's extinction. And it's such a rich tapestry to understand two things. One, a singular history and all of its reverberations across time. Karski himself said we should always teach the Holocaust, but we should also teach to form to make young minds more noble. So he's sort of thinking through both, and it's very humbling to watch how he threads that needle. So the truth is, I follow his lead, and we follow his lead, and that's been my experience with young people reacting to the story.
Awesome. All right, we'll take some questions. Juliet has a microphone.
What brought David Strathairn to this very difficult project? What was his personal connection to it?
Yeah. The question was, what was what brought David to the project, and what was his personal connection to it? David saw Shoah in 1985 in New York, and Karski particularly haunted him, and I think after he sat for the 9 hours and then wandered the streets kind of thinking about it, and when Derek reached out to him about the project, he thought, wow, this is the connection. And that's one of the reasons that we choose to show that Karski break, because it's such a critical moment in the story of Karski and becoming known again. It's also critical in terms of our and David's relationship to the man. And so that, I would say that's the first, and the three of us have become a little bit of a dysfunctional family, and we've been kind of wandering around trying to figure out what this play looked like for a number of years, and I think it's because this last line, "These questions haunt me now and I want it to be so," is very real for us, and those questions are his and mine and Derek's, and I think that's probably part. I can't speak for him specifically, but I can say that.
What did Karski teach at Georgetown?
Yeah, the question is, what did Karski teach at Georgetown? He taught government international relations. He taught theory of communism. He had a very performative style. He would play, Marxist, Lenin, and talk to the students as a character. Another reason that we wanted to sort of honor him through a one-man production is you see him play multiple roles, and the idea that Karski did that also became very intriguing to us. We've had a number. I don't know if there are any Karski students here in the audience, but we've had a lot of Karski students come to see the play, and that has been really, really fulfilling. So.
Great. We'll take one more question.
Thank you. When will this be shown on PBS, and in what format? Will there be a discussion like you're giving us now too, and how much time will it be devoted?
The second part of the question I didn't quite understand. Sorry.
Will it be shown? Will it be shown, just shown, or will there be also a type of discussion like we're having tonight?
Yeah, of course. Yes, it's going to be shown starting March 13th on PBS Great Performances. I think it's at 9 p.m. And I know that it's running through April. I don't know the specifics of it, but I do know that there is a 20-minute doc kind of piece, companion piece following that, with interviews with not just the creative team, but also a number of friends of the project who have worked with us for a long time, including Michael Berenbaum, Holocaust scholar. I'm not positive, but Nancy Pelosi, and a few others. So thinking about Karski's legacy now, maybe Samantha Power. I'm not sure. Yeah. There was one more question back there that I saw that I'm sorry. I felt
That's
like
okay. I was going to ask you what's next for the films.
Oh, nice,
So now we've got our final
nice.
It's not a question so much as a comment. In the 1980s, I heard Karski speak here at a town hall in New York. His entire focus was on his disappointment with Roosevelt. I am the child of two survivors, so my entire life I heard about my parents and my friends and their friends' disappointment with Roosevelt. So this was the first time I had ever heard a non-survivor, as far as I understood, talk about it. Correct me if I'm wrong, and perhaps my memory is incorrect. He spoke with Roosevelt more than once. And this was the 80s, so he was about 60 years old, I'm guessing. He welled up with tears. He was still so disappointed in Roosevelt's dismissal of the Jews being murdered. He was a remarkable man. And thank you for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm really glad that you spoke, because it's always special to know that Karski was somewhere where the play or the film is happening, and that I will say just quickly about Roosevelt. To my knowledge, he only met with him once, but I do think that's another example, and I probably should have cited it earlier to one of your questions about citation. He was very careful, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about that experience, because in many of the oral histories I've seen, he's very careful not to condemn, Roosevelt or Frankfurter, and rather to just present the situations as they happened to him as a 26, 27, 28-year-old man. And of course, he had a remarkable photographic memory. So it's really moving to hear what it cost him in a later moment when he was able to be free of that duty that he felt so compelled to carry with him, and hear about a unique experience that you had. So thank you.
He wasn't happy with Lensman.
Yes,
and
no, I
his
know that story.
portrayal.
Yeah, I know that story as well. Yeah, it's true.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Paul.
you, everybody. Thank you.